My presentation starts with the question, who's in, who's out, and why it matters for democratic health. So probably the most famous feminist missive from the colonial era came from Abigail Adams when she was writing a letter to her husband, John Adams, who was off founding the Republic. She wrote, "In this new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I advise that you should remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." Pretty strong for the 18th century. It's kind of, I was a little bit disappointed in John Adams' reply. It was playful, a little bit dismissive, certainly revealing. He said, "Oh, depend on it, we know better than to repeal our masculine systems." But then he kind of tried to downplay his privilege. He said, "Although they, the masculine systems, are in full force, you know that they are little more than a theory." Unfortunately, patriarchy was a lot more than a theory, and the structural exclusion written into our founding documents continued to echo over 200 years later, when the first woman frontrunner for a major party presidential nomination was edged out by the junior senator from Illinois. Even at that time, though, many of us held on to the notion that, now, contemporarily, can't anyone be president? Technically, isn't that supposed to be the point of our American democratic experiment? Well, that's a question that Tina Fey and Amy Poehler skewered in their send-up of the 2008 presidential campaign when they started Saturday Night Live episode One Night, opening as vice presidential nominee Sarah Palin and Democratic primary loser Hillary Clinton. So, can anyone be president? Really? Well, in 2007, my co-author Christy Sheeler and I set out to answer that very question. See, we had been approached by academic publishers who came to us as scholars who studied gender and politics and communication, and they said, why don't you write a book for us that telling women candidates what they need to do to be taken seriously as presidential candidates. So we dove in. We studied speeches and media coverage and parody and satire, television and film, and internet ephemera. And after looking at all this, we decided that the problem was not the candidates, it was the culture. A culture that punished women politicians who wanted to lead, recycling centuries-old stereotypes about women's leadership in sort of new digital and memeable forms. Then in 2020, although the Democrats assembled the most diverse set of candidates in major party history, both parties still put forward two old white guys to be their candidates for president that year. It was a consequence of norms and assumptions that have hobbled our democracy since its inception, pushing the vast majority of the population to the periphery and robbing our nation of so many people's diverse and constructive contributions. Now, the Trump era ushered in a range of threats to democracy, and communication scholars have cataloged and assessed those. I'm going to talk about just one of them, and what I want to talk about will continue our examination of gender norms in American politics. Just as transgender people started to gain a bit of recognition in our language and culture, there was a backlash against them. Their presence in public spaces, their right to medical care, access to recreation, their presence in the military, representation in stories, and even their right to exist. What I want to draw your attention to today, however, is the pivotal role that language played in this controversy. Now, some lawmakers were quick to constrain language, denying people the right to name themselves, the right to check out stories about themselves and their lives from our libraries, the right to be visible to our children in our communities. These lawmakers know the power of language, and they recognize that certain identities and ways of living dramatically undermine the habits and norms that have elevated one particular form of white masculinity over everything else in our political sphere for more than 200 years. Unfortunately, the stakes are increasing because dehumanizing rhetoric is being normalized and tolerated in civic spaces. And communication scholars know that dehumanizing rhetoric breeds death by homicide and suicide and genocide. What I want for us to consider, though, with these increasing stakes is that, fortunately, we all possess the tools to actually build a healthy democracy, and those tools are the words that we say and that we write and that we post. Last year, Utah's Republican governor, Spencer Cox, knew the power of words when he vetoed a bill seeking to keep transgender kids off recreational sports teams. Now, he knew that the legislature had the votes to override his veto, but he vetoed nonetheless, and in fact, he wrote a pretty careful and thoughtful long letter that he posted and delivered to accompany his veto. He still believed that his words had the power to create connection and conflict in that very contentious situation, and he was trying to help his state find a new way forward. I want to read just a little bit of that letter. 4 kids, and only one of them is playing girls' sports. That's what all of this is about. 4 kids who aren't dominating or winning trophies or taking scholarships. 4 kids who are just trying to find some friends and feel like they're part of something. 4 kids trying to get through each day. Rarely has so much fear and anger been directed at so few. I don't understand what they're going through or why they feel the way they do, but I want them to live. And all the research shows that even a little acceptance and connection can reduce suicidality significantly. For that reason, as much as any other, I've taken this action in the hopes that we can continue to work together and find a better way. If a veto override occurs, I hope that we can find ways to show these 4 kids that we love them and they have a place in our state. Community and connection through communication. That's how you keep a democracy healthy and strong. So I leave you with just one question. Healthy democracy. Who's in?